on a snow-laden Christmas Eve in Chicago. Flynn stood at the entrance of Rosewood Bistro, his broad shoulders dusted with fresh powder, his heart weighted with something far heavier than the winter cold. The 36-year-old father had not been on a date in 3 years. Not since the night his wife Louisa had left this world in a Christmas accident that still haunted his dreams. The wind carried the sound of carols from a nearby shop, and each note felt like a small blade against his resolve. He had promised his daughter he would try, had looked into her hopeful blue eyes that morning, and nodded when she asked if he was really going to meet someone special. Now, standing in the doorway with snowflakes melting on his worn jacket, he wondered if he had the courage to step inside. Inside the warmly lit restaurant, a beautiful woman sat waiting. Her posture elegant but guarded, her fingers wrapped around a wine glass she had barely touched. Alexandra Bernice, 34, and quietly, devastated by her own past, glanced at her watch with barely concealed impatience. She had agreed to this evening against her better judgment, had let her friend convince her that it was time, that 3 years was long enough to mourn a future that never came. But sitting in this restaurant, decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, surrounded by couples leaning close over candlelight, she felt only the familiar ache of disappointment mixed with something sharper, something closer to dread. The blind date was failing before it had truly begun. Carter fumbled his words, spoke of home repairs and his daughter's school projects, his nervousness manifesting in gestures too large, laughter too quick. Alexandra offered polite smiles that never reached her gray eyes, answered questions about her work with the practiced brevity of someone who had learned to keep the world at arm's length. And then from behind a potted fir tree decorated with silver ribbons, a small voice whispered the words that would change everything. Bridget Flynn, 7 years old, with hair like spun gold, tugged her father's sleeve and looked up at the distant woman across the table. "Daddy?" she breathed, her blue eyes bright with a certainty no adult could explain. "She's the one." Carter Flynn had the kind of face that told stories without words. His features were kind, weathered by late nights and early mornings, by single parenthood and the weight of loss. His brown hair held streaks of premature gray at the temples, and his hands, rough from electrical work and plumbing repairs, were the hands of a man who had rebuilt his life from broken pieces. He had once been a mechanical engineer, brilliant and promising. But when Louisa died, he could not bear the corporate world anymore. He needed to be home for Bridget, needed to walk her to school, needed to be there when she woke from nightmares. So he became a repairman, fixing water heaters and circuit breakers, earning just enough to keep their small apartment warm and their small world intact. His daughter was his entire universe, a tiny blonde girl with her mother's eyes and a wisdom that sometimes frightened him. Bridget carried a stuffed bear named Astrid everywhere, a gift from Louisa in her final days. And she spoke with the clear-eyed honesty of children who have seen sadness too young. Alexandra Bernice occupied a different world entirely. She was a senior marketing manager at one of Chicago's most respected firms, a woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar campaigns with cool pressing. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, professionally styled, and she dressed in tailored coats and silk scarves that spoke of success hard-won. But beneath the polished exterior lived a woman who no longer believed in fairy tales. 10 years earlier, she had lost her younger sister in a car accident, a grief that had carved out a hollow place in her chest. And just 3 years ago, on the eve of what should have been the happiest day of her life, her fiancé had confessed to an affair with her best friend. The wedding had been cancelled, the venue emptied, and Alexandra had locked her heart behind walls of professional ambition and calculated distance. She had agreed to this blind date only because her colleague had begged, insisted, promised it would be different. But sitting across from this gentle, awkward man who smelled of sawdust and spoke of his daughter with reverence, Alexandra felt only the familiar ache of disappointment. The restaurant glowed with amber light, garlands of evergreen draped along the walls, candles flickering on white tablecloths. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent curtains, blanketing Michigan Avenue in a hush that felt almost sacred. Carter tried to make conversation, asked about her work, her interests, but every sentence seemed to fall flat. He knocked over his water glass when he reached for the breadbasket, and the resulting puddle spread across the table like a metaphor for his nervousness. Alexandra dabbed at it with her napkin, offered a tight smile, and Carter felt the evening slipping away like melting snow. What Carter did not know was that Bridget had wandered closer to their table, her small face pressed between the branches of the decorative tree, watching. The little girl studied Alexandra with the intensity of someone reading a story only she could see. She noticed the way Alexandra's fingers kept returning to a silver necklace at her throat, a delicate chain holding a tiny snowflake pendant. She saw how Alexandra's eyes grew distant when Carter mentioned Christmas traditions, how her breath caught just slightly as though she were swallowing pain. Bridget recognized that look. She saw it in her father's eyes every December. The shadow that passed over his face when carols played in grocery stores, the way he held his coffee cup a little tighter when neighbors spoke of family gatherings. Alexandra's snowflake necklace had been a gift to her younger sister, Emma, purchased at a street fair during a December years ago when the world still felt safe. Emma had loved snow, had danced in it, had believed in the magic of every unique crystal. When Emma died, Alexandra found the necklace in her sister's jewelry box and had worn it ever since. A quiet morning she carried against her skin. She touched it now, unconsciously, as Carter spoke of his wife's love for winter. How Louisa had made snowflakes from paper every year and hung them in their windows. The coincidence pressed against Alexandra's carefully constructed composure like a crack in ice. Carter noticed the necklace, too. Noticed the sudden moisture in Alexandra's eyes before she blinked it away. He wanted to ask, wanted to reach across the table and offer comfort for whatever grief he had accidentally touched. But before he could find the words, Alexandra stood abruptly, excused herself to the restroom, and Carter watched her walk away, her spine straight, her steps measured. He dropped his head into his hands, certain he had ruined everything. It was Bridget who appeared then, sliding into Alexandra's empty chair with her bear clutched to her chest. Carter looked up, startled. "Sweetheart, you're supposed to be at the kids' table with the crayons." "She's sad like you." "Daddy," Bridget said simply. "I can tell." Outside, the snow intensified, wind picking up. The weather service warnings Carter had ignored earlier now proving prophetic. The storm that had been predicted as minor was strengthening, and the temperature was dropping fast. Inside Rosewood Bistro, the first signs of trouble began with a flicker of the overhead lights, then a gust of wind that rattled the windows hard enough to draw nervous glances from other diners. When Alexandra returned to the table, her makeup carefully restored, she found Bridget sitting in her seat, small hands folded as though waiting for a grown-up conversation. "Your necklace is pretty," Bridget said, her voice gentle. "My mama had one like it. She's in heaven now." Alexandra's breath stopped. She looked at the child, really looked, and saw the same hollow ache she carried mirrored in eyes too young to understand such loss. "I'm very sorry," Alexandra whispered, lowering herself into the chair beside Bridget rather than across from her. "My little sister is in heaven, too." She loved snowflakes. Carter watched the exchange, something shifting in his chest, a door he had bolted shut 3 years ago beginning to crack open. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed dimmed. A waiter hurried past with an apologetic expression, murmuring about power fluctuations. Through the tall windows, the street outside had transformed into a whiteout, visibility reduced to mere feet. Cars crawled along the avenue, their headlights diffused into useless halos. The bistro manager appeared, hands raised to quiet the murmuring crowd, announcing that the city had issued travel warnings and that streets were closing due to rapid accumulation and black ice. Carter immediately stood, his protective instincts overriding his awkwardness. "Bridget, we need to get home before this gets worse." He looked at Alexandra, apology written across his face. "I'm sorry. I need to get her somewhere safe." Alexandra stood, too, her professional facade slipping to reveal genuine concern. "The buses have stopped running. I heard someone say the trains are delayed." "How far do you live?" 40-minute walk in good weather. Carter admitted with Bridget in this storm. "I don't know." Bridget, seeming to sense the adult anxiety building, squeezed her father's hand. "It's okay, Daddy. We'll be okay." But the child's reassurance proved premature. As Carter helped Bridget into her coat, as Alexandra gathered her own belongings, the little girl's attention was drawn to the window, to the swirling white world beyond. She had never seen snow fall so thick, had never watched it pile against glass in drifts that seemed to climb higher by the minute. Without thinking, entranced by the beauty and strangeness of it, Bridget slipped away from her father's side and pushed through the bistro's front door into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath, and she stumbled forward, her small boots immediately sinking into snow that reached past her knees. She wanted to turn back, but the door had closed behind her, and the wind was so loud she could not hear her own voice. Inside, Carter turned to take Bridget's hand and found empty air. His heart stopped. "Bridget," he spun, searching the immediate area. Then the color drained from his face. "Bridget," the word came out as a roar that silenced the restaurant. He lunged toward the door, Alexandra right behind him, and they burst into the storm together. The wind sliced through clothing, the snow so thick it obscured the street, the buildings, everything. Carter's voice cracked as he called his daughter's name. Panic stripping away every careful control he had built over 3 years of single fatherhood. This was his nightmare, the one that woke him gasping at 2 o'clock in the morning, the terror that he would lose her the way he had lost Louisa, that he would fail the one person who needed him most. Alexandra, shivering in her wool coat that was elegant but utterly inadequate for a blizzard, saw the raw fear in Carter's face and made a decision. She would not leave him alone in this. She cuped her hands around her mouth and called for Bridget, too, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. They moved together, checking behind cars, between storefronts, Carter's hands shaking as he swept snow away from potential hiding spots. It was Alexandra who spotted the small pink shape huddled against a parked vehicle in the restaurant's parking area, a tiny figure nearly buried in white. "There," she pointed, and Carter was already running, his boots slipping on ice, his body crashing to his knees beside his daughter. Brigitte was crying, her face red with cold, her teeth chattering so violently she could not speak. Carter pulled her into his arms, wrapped his coat around her, used his own body to shield her from the wind. "I've got you, baby! I've got you!" His voice broke on the words. Alexandra arrived seconds later and, without hesitation, removed her own scarf and wrapped it around Brigitte's head and shoulders, then pressed herself against Carter's back, adding her body as another barrier against the storm. The three of them huddled there, strangers hours ago, now locked together in a fight against nature's fury. "We can't stay out here," Alexandra said, her lips nearly numb. "We need to get back inside." Together, they struggled to their feet, Carter carrying Bridget, Alexandra guiding them back toward the amber glow of the bistro. They stumbled through the door and nearly collapsed, snow sliding off them in chunks, water pooling on the floor. Other patrons rushed forward with blankets, with towels, with hot drinks. The manager announced that no one would be leaving tonight, that the restaurant would serve as an emergency shelter until the storm passed or city services could reach them. Kata sat in a corner booth, Bridget wrapped in 3 blankets, her small body still trembling. He rubbed her arms, her back, whispered reassurances while his own heart hammered against his ribs. Alexandra slid into the booth beside them, her hair plastered to her head, her expensive silk blouse ruined, her hands shaking from more than cold. She reached out and placed one hand on Bridget's knee, a gesture of comfort that surprised even herself. "You're very brave," Alexandra told the little girl softly. "Braver than I've been in a long time." Bridget looked up at her, blue eyes still wet with tears but clearing. "You came to find me, too," she said. Just like Daddy, something passed between Carter and Alexandra. Then an understanding that bypassed words. In that moment, in the chaos of the storm and the terror of nearly losing a child, the walls they had each built around themselves developed cracks. Carter saw not the polished professional who had seemed so distant at dinner, but a woman who had run into a blizzard for a child she barely knew. Alexandra saw not the awkward, grieving widower, but a father whose love was so fierce it bordered on holy. The bistro settled into an uneasy vigil. Families clustered together, strangers shared tables, and the staff moved through the room, offering what comfort they could. The powers stabilized enough to keep the heat running, and someone found battery-powered lanterns that cast softer kinda light than the overhead. The golden glow transformed the restaurant into something timeless, a refuge suspended outside the normal flow of hours and obligations. It felt almost like a dream. This collection of people suspended between one moment and the next, waiting for the world outside to calm. Carter could not stop looking at his daughter, could not stop touching her hair, her face, assuring himself she was truly safe. The fear had dredged up memories he fought daily to suppress, memories of another winter night, of headlights sliding on ice, of the phone call that had ended his world. He had promised himself he would never let anything happen to Bridget, had structured his entire life around keeping her safe, and tonight he had failed. The guilt sat heavy in his throat, a stone he could not swallow. Alexandra watched him with something dangerously close to tenderness. She recognized the self-remination in his eyes, the way he seemed to fold into himself with each passing minute. She had carried that same weight after her sister died, had spent months replaying every decision, every moment, wondering if she could have changed the outcome. She wanted to tell him it was not his fault. The children were quick and unpredictable, that he had found Bridget and brought her back, and that was what mattered. But the words felt inadequate, too small for the size of his fear. So instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The touch startled them both. Carter looked down at their joined hands, then up at Alexandra's face, and found there an echo of his own pain, a recognition that went deeper than sympathy. "You lost someone at Christmas, too," he said quietly. It was not a question. Alexandra nodded, her throat tight. "My sister? My wife?" Carter whispered. 3 years, car accident on Christmas Eve. He swallowed hard. "I thought tonight maybe trying to move forward. Maybe it was time. But I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to be anything other than Bridget's father. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Alexandra confessed. "I built my whole life around being someone who doesn't need anyone, who can't be hurt again. And then I watched you run into that storm for your daughter. And I thought, maybe I've been wrong about what strength looks like." Bridget, drowsy from warmth and exhaustion, murmured something. Neither adult caught it first. Alexandra leaned closer. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "You're not scary anymore," Bridget said sleepily. "You look like Mama when you smile at Daddy." Alexandra's eyes failed, and this time she did not try to hide it. Carter's hand tightened around hers and they sat there, Two broken people beginning to believe against all odds that broken things could still fit together. But peace was fragile, and the night was not yet finished with them. Across the restaurant near the bar, where a few patrons had gathered to watch the storm through the large windows, a man stood watching Carter and Alexandra with narrowed eyes. Silas Orton had worked with Alexandra for 5 years, had asked her to dinner a dozen times, had been refused each time with polite professionalism. He had seen her arrive at the bistro tonight, had watched her blind date unfold from his own table in the corner, and he had felt the sting of rejection sharpen into something uglier when he saw the way she looked at the ordinary plain-dressed repairmen across from her. When the storm had trapped them all inside, Silas had initially been pleased, thinking it gave him more time to position himself as the better choice, the more suitable companion. But watching Alexandra tend to Carter's child, seeing her hold Carter's hand with a gentleness she had never shown him, Silas felt his ego curdle in despite. He approached their table with a smile that did not reach his eyes, 2 cups of coffee in his hands as though offering kindness. "Alexandra, I thought you might need this." He set 1 cup in front of her, then turned to Carter with practiced condescension. "Quite a night for a first date, isn't it? Though I suppose Alexandra told you this was all part of the office charity initiative?" Carter blinked, confused. "Charity initiative?" Silas widened his eyes in mock surprise. "Oh, she didn't mention. We've been running this program at work, pairing executives with people from, well, different backgrounds. Community outreach, good for the company image." He clapped Carter on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "I think it's wonderful what you're doing, participating. Not everyone would be comfortable being someone's good deed." The words landed like stones. Carter's face went very still, his hand withdrawing from Alexandra's, as though burned. Alexandra stared at Silas with dawning horror, understanding immediately what he had done, what he was trying to do. "That's not true," she said sharply. "Silas, that's a complete lie." But the damage was already taking root. Carter stood, his movements stiff, his expression shuttered. "It's fine," he said quietly. "I should check on Bridget." Except Bridget was right there looking between the adults with worried eyes, sensing something wrong. "Carter, please." Alexandra stood tall, reaching for him. Lying. "There's no charity program. I agreed to this date because a friend set it up because I thought maybe I was ready to try again." "It's okay," Carter repeated, and the emptiness in his voice was worse than anger. "Thank you for helping with Bridget. I appreciate it." He lifted his daughter into his arms, blankets and all, and moved to a different booth across the room, his back to Alexandra, his shoulders rigid with hurt. Silas smiled at Alexandra's stricken face. "I was just trying to help clarify things. No need to let misunderstandings drag on." "Get away from me," Alexandra said, her voice shaking with fury. "You're a petty, cruel man, and you just hurt someone who's been through enough." "I hurt someone," Silas scoffed. "You're the one slumming with the help." "Alexandra, I was doing you a favor, reminding you who you actually are." "I know exactly who I am," Alexandra said coldly. "I'm someone who just realized she's been wasting years of her life working alongside people like you." She turned away from him, but her hands were trembling, her heart fractured by the look on Carter's face, by the way he had retreated, as though expecting rejection all along. The night stretched on, the storm outside showing no signs of weakening. Alexandra sat alone at her table, watching Carter across the room as he held Bridget, rocking her gently, his face turned toward the window. She wanted to go to him to explain, to somehow undo what Silas had poisoned, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. Bridget, though, had different plans. The little girl was tired but not sleeping, and she had heard everything. She slipped from her father's arms when he dozed off for just a moment and padded across the restaurant in her sock feet until she stood in front of Alexandra's table. "You made Daddy sad," Bridget said. But there was no accusation in her voice, only observation. "I didn't mean to," Alexandra whispered. "The man who said those things, he was lying. I didn't know tonight was going to be special. I just thought it was another disappointing evening. But then I met you, and I met your father, and everything changed." Bridget studied her with those two wise eyes. "Daddy thinks nobody will ever love him again because Mama's gone. He thinks he's too broken." She climbed into the booth beside Alexandra uninvited, her small hand finding Alexandra's larger one. "But you're broken too, aren't you? Primera caenetel, and you still came to find me in the snow." Alexandra's tears finally fell, silent and hot on her cold cheeks. I'm broken? I've been broken for a very long time. Maybe broken people can fix each other," Bridget said. "Like when Daddy glues my toys, 2 broken pieces can make one whole thing." She leaned against Alexandra's side, trusting and warm. "I think you're the one, even if Daddy's too scared right now." Across the room, Carter woke to find Bridget gone and sat up in panic before spotting her with Alexandra. His first instinct was to retrieve her, to maintain the distance that felt safer than hope. But watching his daughter curl against the woman who had run into a blizzard for her, watching Alexandra hold Bridget with such careful tenderness, Carter felt the first crack in his resolve. The hours crept toward dawn, the storm finally beginning to lose its fury as the first gray light touched the sky. City snowplows rumbled past, their orange lights flashing through the windows, and the bistro manager announced that streets were being cleared, that transit would resume within hours. People began to stir, gathering belongings, checking phones, making plans to return to their disrupted lives. Carter approached Alexandra's table slowly, Bridget still asleep against her shoulder. "I should take her," he said quietly. Alexandra looked up at him, her eyes red from crying, from exhaustion, from the weight of the night. "I'm not a charity case, and you're not mine," she said. "What Silas said, it was cruel, and it was false. I don't expect you to believe me, but I need you to know it's true." Carter was silent for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her, careful not to wake Bridget. "I want to believe you," he admitted. "But I've spent 3 years believing that what I had with Louisa was once in a lifetime, that trying for anything else was foolish. And then tonight, for the first time, I felt something that wasn't just grief, and it terrified me. When Silas said what he said, part of me was almost relieved, because fear is easier than hope." "I know," Alexandra said. "I know exactly what you mean, because I felt it too. That terrifying possibility that maybe I could try again, that maybe you could see past all my defenses. And when you pulled away, I wanted to let you go to prove to myself that I was right not to trust anyone. But then your daughter reminded me that being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the thing anyway. She's wise, beyond her years," Carter said with a sad smile. "She gets that from you," Alexandra replied. She reached across the table, palmed up, an offering. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we're too broken, too damaged, too scared, but I know I don't want to walk away without trying, without at least being honest. I haven't felt this much in 3 years, and yes, it hurts, but it also feels like maybe I'm still alive after all." Carter looked at her hand, then at her face, and saw there a reflection of his own desperate hope. He placed his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining, and Bridget stirred between them, murmuring something in her sleep that sounded like, "Told you so." The city outside was waking, white and clean under fresh snow, and inside Rosewood Bistro, 2 broken people held on to each other with the fragile strength of those who have decided to try again. By mid-morning, the streets were passable, and people began to depart. Carter and Alexandra stood in the bistro's entrance, Bridget bundled in her coat, holding her bear, The moment felt heavy with possibility, with all the things they had not yet said, all the fear they had not yet conquered. "Can I see you again?" Carter asked, the words awkward but sincere. "Properly, I mean, yes," Alexandra said, and her smile was the first real one he had seen from her. "I'd like that very much." Bridget tugged on Alexandra's coat. "Can you come to our house for Christmas? We make paper snowflakes. Daddy's not very good at it, but I can teach you." Alexandra knelt down to Bridget's level. "I would be honored to make snowflakes with you." 3 days passed, days during which Carter and Alexandra texted carefully, spoke on the phone late at night when Bridget was asleep, learned the contours of each other's grief and hope. They discovered small things, important things. Carter learned that Alexandra took her coffee black, but loved hot chocolate with excessive marshmallows. That she had wanted to be a teacher before ambition and heartbreak steered her toward corporate success. Alexandra learned that Carter sang off-key to old rock songs when he cooked. That he kept a photograph of Louisa in his wallet, not out of inability to let go, but as a promise to never forget where he came from. They were careful with each other, tender, aware that what they were building was fragile and precious. And on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the storm, Alexandra arrived at their small apartment, carrying a bag of craft supplies and a heart that felt dangerously open. She had stood outside their building for 5 minutes, breathing in the cold air, steadying herself. This was the moment. She knew when she would either step fully into the possibility of love again or retreat to the safety of solitude. She chose the former, chose courage, chose the chance to become whole. Carter answered the door in a flour-dusted apron, and the apartment smelled of baking cookies, of cinnamon and vanilla, and home. Bridget squealed and launched herself at Alexandra, who caught her with a laugh that startled them all with its joy. A sound so pure it seemed to fill every corner of the small space. They spent the evening cutting paper snowflakes, each one unique, each one imperfect, hanging them in the windows where they caught the light from the small Christmas tree in the corner. The tree was modest, barely 5 feet tall, decorated with handmade ornaments and strings of popcorn that Bridget had insisted on making herself. It was nothing like the elegant trees Alexandra had known in her childhood, in the homes of wealth and carefully curated beauty. It was better when Bridget fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in blankets and clutching Astrid. Carter and Alexandra stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall again, gentler this time, peaceful. "I've been so afraid," Carter admitted. "Afraid that letting you in meant letting go of Louisa, that I'd be betraying her memory." "And now?" Alexandra asked gently. "Now I think maybe she'd want me to be happy again, to give Bridget a full life, to not spend the rest of my days just surviving." He turned to face Alexandra, taking both her hands. "You make me want to live again, not just exist. And that's terrifying, but it's also the best thing I felt in years." Alexandra leaned her forehead against his. "I spent so long thinking love was something that would destroy me again, that trusting anyone was just setting myself up for another betrayal. But with you, it feels different. It feels like maybe we can build something new out of all our broken pieces." "Bridget was right," Carter said with a soft laugh. "That first night, when she said you were the one, I thought she was just a child making wishes. But she saw what I was too scared to see." The clock struck midnight, Christmas Day, arriving with quiet certainty. You're now looking at the Jungfrau in the Swiss Alps, standing at 4,158 meters. It's one of Europe's most iconic snow-covered peaks. From here, you can admire glaciers, valleys, and lakes, an unforgettable panoramic view. Riding the cogwheel train to the top of Europe is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, whether hiking in summer or skiing in winter. This is a paradise for nature lovers. Bridget joined them at the window, the three of them silhouetted against the falling snow. Outside, The city sparkled with Christmas lights. But inside this small apartment, the real magic was quieter, deeper. A family was being born from grief and hope in equal measure, from two people brave enough to try again, from a child wise enough to see what adults tried to deny. The paper snowflakes spun gently in the warm air. Each one different, each one beautiful, each one a small miracle hanging in the window like a promise that broken things, given time and love and courage, could become whole again. And somewhere in the space between memory and tomorrow, Louisa Flynn smiled, knowing her daughter would be loved. Her husband would be happy. And the heart she had left behind had found room enough to hold both the past and the future without losing either fun.